How you guys doing? Another day's walk here, and this is the beginning of my video. I just want to put out a little FYI. It was really early in the morning when filming the video that you're about to see, so I seem a little off. And in the last video, I was the same way, and the only reason that was is because I filmed it at like 6 o'clock in the morning, right when I first woke up, and I'm not gonna do that again. So just so you guys know, the only reason I'm a little off in the video and a little like not full with my words like I normally am is because it was just I woke up, didn't even drink coffee yet, and said I'm gonna film this video. Thank you guys for listening to this little intro. Hey guys, another day's walk here, and this is questions about the AT, the Georgia section. Let's get it going. Alrighty, let's get started about this Georgia section. There is 78.1 mile of trail. If you count the approach trail, it'll be 85, 86 miles. I can't remember. I'm trying to count here, and it's too early in the morning for me to be counting for you guys. Anyway, first on this, I'm going to start about, I got a little cheat sheet here, everything I need on it. But I'm going to start with the approach trail. Mile 2.5 on the approach. For the first 2.5 miles of the approach trail, you're going pretty flat. There's some gravel road down through there, like gravel trail, because it's, it's the beginning of something. And then at about mile 2.5, you start going down and you start just shooting down. And then at mile 3.1, there's a campsite on the approach trail. When you finally get to mile 3.6, you get to Summit Amicalola Falls, which is probably the first big thing you do on the approach trail, and even on the Appalachian Trail, if you're considering doing the approach trail, which I am myself. At mile 4.25, intersects with Hike In Trail, which if you guys have seen IB Tat's video where he went the wrong direction, I believe that was Hike In Trail. At mile 4.9 at Nimblewell Gap, that's just a gap you come to during the trail. Mile 6.2, good water source normally, so most of the time all through the year at the mile marker 6.2, there's always good water there. At mile 6.4, you start climbing Springer Mountain, so it starts going up just a little bit. And then mile 7, you just really start heading uphill, really cranking up that hill to Springer Mountain. And at mile 7.8 is when you actually summit Springer Mountain. And now we're on the Appalachian Trail. Mile 0.2 is the Springer Mountain Shelter. So just a little farther. Pretty much, if you start at the bottom of the approach trail and you walk up to Springer Mountain Shelter, you went 8 miles. So, it's not too bad. Now, the parking area, Springer parking area, is 1 mile on the AT. And that is where some people actually park and have to walk the mile and then walk the mile back. Why do that when you can just walk to 7.8 of the approach trail? Anyway, mile 2.8, you get to Stover Creek Shelter. So you got 2 shelters there within 3 miles of the AT. 2 shelters within the first 3 miles of the AT. At mile 8.1, you got Hawk Mountain Shelter. Hawk Mountain Shelter at 8.1. At mile 12.2, you got Cooper Gap. At mile 15.7, that's when you get to Gooch Mountain Shelter. So 15.7 is Gooch Mountain Shelter. Mile 20.5 is Woody Gap. Mile 27.7 is Woods Hole Shelter. And that's a shelter I've actually never heard of. Never heard much about it. That's probably, I don't know. I just never heard much about it. And then mile 28.9, you get to Blood Mountain Shelter, which almost everybody that knows anything about the trail has heard about Blood Mountain Shelter. Then mile 31.3, you are at Nails Gap. Nails Gap's pretty much a big spot on the trail in Georgia because that's where a lot of people actually quit. Right there at Nails Gap, you got the tree that has the shoes in it. Can't think of the name. There's probably a name for the tree. And actually, that is the only spot on the AT that it goes through a covered section. Like there's a roof over your head. It's the only place on the whole trail, and it's right there in the first 32 miles. 31.3. Mile 37.3, you got Tesnutty Gap. Tesnutty Gap. Okay, I'm gonna butcher that name, but it's some gap. At mile 38, you're at Whitney Gap Shelter, which is the first shelter you get to after Nils Gap. So the first shelter you get to after Nils Gap is Whitney Gap Shelter. Then mile 38.2 is Hogan Gap, which is not Hogpen Gap. Sorry about that. Hogpen Gap is 38.2. That's not much farther after Whitney Gap Shelter. And then at mile 42.8, you got Low Gap Shelter. So that's your next shelter after the Whitney Gap Shelter. So you got from 38 to 42.8. At mile 50.1, you got Blue Mountain Shelter. And I was looking at that, and I thought it said Blood Mountain Shelter. I said, I've already wrote down Blood Mountain Shelter. But then I seen it said Blue Mountain Shelter. And I didn't know much about Blue Mountain Shelter, so I thought that was pretty cool. Then you got at mile 52.5, Unicoi Gap. And I've heard Unicoi Gap on a lot of things, but it's just because of stupid stuff in videos. And then mile 56.9, you got Trey Gap. Then you're actually getting up to Trey Mountain, which Trey Mountain and Blood Mountain is two of the biggest mountains you come to in Georgia. And two of the hardest mountains you come to in Georgia. At mile 58.2 is Trey Mountain Shelter. Then at mile 65.6, you got Deep Gap Shelter. At mile 69.2, you got Dix Creek Gap. Mile 73.7, you got Plum Orchard Gap. And then finally, at mile 78.1, you're at the North Carolina-Georgia line. So, that is all of the actual shelters on the AT and stuff you'll come up to in Georgia. Now, I was going to tell you about how much the trail drops and how much it goes up. And I started doing all that. But then I said you guys probably would end up getting tired of just hearing all of that. So pretty much anytime there's a gap, the trail's going down into the gap. And then it comes back out. And goes up. And I will say the first possibly 7, 8 miles of the AT, you're actually going a pretty good bit downhill. All the trail up to Hawk Mountain, up to the bottom of Hawk Mountain, is pretty steady trail. I mean, you will go up some, but on the most part, it's pretty steady trail. Now, the approach, sorry about that. Now the approach trail, that'll kick you in the butt if you're not used to that, because it goes way up. And they have that campsite on the approach trail, which I don't understand why they would do that. But I guess it's not necessarily for people that's walking to the AT. It's just for people that is wanting to camp and all that. So it makes sense. But it's only like 3.1 miles from the beginning of the trail. Let me go over this and I'll be back. and let you guys know what I've missed. I now believe I told you guys everything I want to tell you about Georgia and the Appalachian Trail. I hope you guys liked this. I will say all of the stuff I told you, not all of it could be completely true because the trail changes from years to years. So if you're watching this and they're down the road like a year and a half and you're like, man, that's zero point 0.2 miles off, I'm sorry, the trail probably kind of changed 0.2 miles. Or maybe I was just off to 0.2 miles. You never know. I did all my research through 2 different days and I did it after I got off work. So it was really late at night. But I was trying to get all of this stuff perfect for you guys. I even changed some of it, went through, seeing if I missed anything. And I believe I got everything. So the biggest things you get in Georgia is Nils Gap, North Carolina, Georgia line, Blood Mountain, and Trey Mountain. That is what I would call the big things in Georgia. You got Nils Gap, which is a crazy milestone. You pass it. Well, first Springer Mountain, then you got Nils Gap. Well, Springer Mountain, then Blood Mountain, then you got Nils Gap, then you got Trey Mountain, then you got the North Carolina border. And that's the big things you get to see in Georgia. Everything's pretty much a milestone inside the state, and the state by itself is a milestone, which is crazy. Then you have all these little tiny stones you could pass, like the gaps and the shelters that I just went over in order. I'm not going to go over all of them again. There is too many. When I get to these bigger states, I'm going to be hurting myself trying to get through all these. These videos are going to be getting too long. So, I hope you guys are enjoying this series. Please like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification button to join the Sunnyside Squad, and like always, I'll see you on the sunny side.